All right, Crim 15, Chapter 12. Discretion and dilemmas in corrections. So here are your learning objectives. As usual, I am going to skip through, but you can pause if you would like to. Correctional officers, COs. A lot of you will say prison guards. Okay, I'm going to tell you, I know it seems silly. Having worked around a lot of correctional officers, they don't like to be called prison guards. They're not prison guards, they're correctional officers. So correctional officers really is, right now, is that correct terminology? So if you would call them COs, they would appreciate that. So they are, in a way, they are similar to police officers in that they have a uniform and authority. They also do have powers of arrest. They don't have the exact same powers of arrest that a police officer has. Same thing with probation or parole officers or agents. Parole typically are called agents. Probation are typically called officers. But they do PC 832, which is you do have certain powers of arrest, not exactly the same as police officers. So like as a probation officer, I had the powers to arrest people who were on probation, or I could arrest people like as a citizen, just like anybody else could. Anyways, it is impossible to effectively depend on the authority of the uniform to get tasks accomplished. I know you're shocked. People didn't always just listen to absolutely everything that a probation, parole, or correctional officer said. But like police officers, correctional officers have a range of coercive control over inmates, from loss of liberty to lethal force, depending on what is needed. So should a correctional officer have sensitivity to ethical issues? Of course. The whole concept of corrections and what the purpose of corrections is and has changed over the past 30, 40, 50 years. Kind of from the concept of punishment to the concept back. Actually, it started with rehabilitation, went to punishment, and now we're kind of back to the rehabilitation mode. So when the goals change, the concept and the whole idea of how the correctional officers should treat inmates kind of changes as well. So correctional officers have also become more professional during that time. They have unionized, of course. Some correctional officers, some agencies require some education, at least for probation. When I got hired as a probation officer, there were still some agencies in the area, some counties in the area that did not require a bachelor's degree to become a probation officer. I want to say Tulare County and Madera County did not require it at the time, but that was in 1997, I think. Now I'm not familiar with any agencies in the area where you can get hired as a probation officer without at least a bachelor's degree. So there are some changes that have taken place in the field to make the field more professional and diverse. Diversity has definitely become an issue, which is something that has been a really positive step forward in the world of corrections for many reasons. Do correctional officers have discretion? And yeah, of course they do. The traits of a good correctional officer would consist of fairness, flexibility, and consistency. It's really similar to that of a good parent, which is really interesting. I learned a lot about how to be a parent from my work as being a probation officer, which is actually kind of weird. Really interesting statement. When a good officer decides to bypass the rules, all involved tend to agree that that is the right decision. When someone that you look up to or respect decides to bypass a rule, you kind of think, well, if so-and-so did it, and I think so-and-so is a good person or a good PO or a good CO, then maybe it's okay. That's tough. That's a tough spot to be in. So remember that when you are in a leadership role, or when you have younger people looking or watching you, that your decisions, what you do, definitely can have an impact. A good officer treats inmates in a professional manner, gives them respect they deserve as a human being, and they treat inmates the way they would like to be treated. And this is still true. This is true today. I remember many times meeting my probation clients for the first time, and I would watch my coworkers too. Everybody has a different style. But I would meet them. I would, walk up, shake their hand, introduce myself, and basically try and set the tone like, hey, I'm going to treat you just like you treat me. So that's where we're going with this relationship. If you're an a-hole to me, then I'm going to be an a-hole to you. But honestly, if I'm willing to work with you. My whole job here is to help you get better and get off probation and move on with your life and not do this anymore. And that's how I would want to be treated. So new era of corrections. So you are probably aware of AB 109. And AB 109 is realignment. That was about 2011 when state of California our prison system had to release thousands and thousands of inmates because our prisons were so full. And that was a result of mostly of probably 3 strikes, better medical care, all kinds of stuff. But our prisons were so full that we had to get rid of a bunch of inmates. And that was because the Supreme Court said, California, you are so full that you are not able to actually properly even care for your inmates. And that was after a Supreme Court case called Plata versus Brown. Governor Brown was the one that was sued, and the inmate was named Plata. And he was trying to see a doctor or a nurse because he was sick, and it took so long for him to see this doctor because there were so many other people in front of him in line to see the doctor that he was like, it's actually cruel and unusual punishment at this point because I can't even see a doctor because there's so many inmates in here. So that definitely changed things drastically for California. So there was inadequate medical screening, delays in medical care, untimely responses for medical emergencies. And honestly, California, could not handle the load of inmates we had. We were at 140% of capacity. We had 140% of the inmates that we should have had in our prison system. So we were 40% over max. That's ridiculous. So so we had to get rid of that extra 40%, which was challenging because that meant probation officers and parole agents got to watch them, or they got to just live back in our communities. But anyways, a relationship with inmates, both guards and inmates prefer to live in peace. No doubt about that. Both feel like they must take sides when a conflict occurs. And inmates are always going to choose the side of the inmate, and the officers are always going to choose the side of the officers. Officers are dependent on inmates for completion of important tasks. In return, officers may overlook inmate infractions and allow a degree of favoritism. Something else to think about. Consider there's one correctional officer, and there's a specific video that we watch. It's Beyond Bars Rookie Year. We watched this in my Intro to Corrections class. There's one correctional officer, and he is working in a dorm type setting with something like 75 inmates. Who has the power in that situation? I mean, really, who really has the power? There are 75 inmates and there's one correctional officer. You know who has the power there. The inmates are allowing that officer to control that situation. So that is a very tricky situation. Ooh, did I go past 2? No. Officers do have the power to make it life difficult for inmates they don't like. Do officers ever become sexually involved with inmates? Yes. An alliance sometimes forms between guards and inmates that is not unlike foreman-employee relationships. That definitely does happen too. You can be friendly with inmates, but you can never trust them. That is 100% true. They will shank you in the back as soon as they can. Mature officers learn to live with this inconsistency. Sexual relationships and sexual abuse in prison. It's really horrible that we actually have to talk about this, but this does happen. Surprisingly, male inmates and female officers. Male inmates are very manipulative, and they will find that one weak officer, that one weak female officer who needs to be told how pretty she is, or whatever. They will find her. They will find that officer. Sexual assault is rare, but more inmates experience other forms of sexual victimization. Transgender and homosexual inmates are more likely to be sexually victimized. So sexual abuse absolutely positively happens in prison. There is something called PREA, Prison Rape Elimination Act. This is, I'm going to say the word funny, but it's funny in a not funny way. My husband sells some machinery, large machinery that dices, cuts food, like Del Monte, Dole. Anyways, one of the prisons bought one of his machines. They have large knives, like the size of your arm, that dice stuff. And one of the prisons bought it, and my husband had to go and train them how to use the machine in the prison. And he had to sign a document saying that he understood that he could get raped and that he promised he wouldn't rape anybody when he was in the prison. And that is part of PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act. As a part of PREA, they are very specific about visitors who come into the prison, understanding that rape is possible, and that they make visitors promise they won't rape anybody when they go into the prison. So, yeah, he was not excited to go. I'm like, don't worry, you'll be fine. And then I checked our life insurance policy to make sure it was all paid up, and he was fine. I'm joking, by the way. You guys don't know me. That's the bad part. Okay. Use of force. Is force ever used in prisons? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Okay. Physical force is often necessary in prison situations. Yes, it just happens. A lot of these people are serious violent. In California, you can only be sent to prison right now for a serious violent felony. That's the only type of crime that is eligible for prison. Otherwise, our prisons are too full and you cannot go. So people who sell drugs are not in prison right now. You only can be there for a serious violent felony. Prior to the 1980s, overt physical force was routinely used. Tune-ups, officers would beat people up. Tucker telephone, apparently this is something that was attached to men's genitals. It was an electrocution style deal that was attached to the genitals and used at will to deliver a shock. And then, okay, wait. And then Hudson versus McMillan was the first case where the courts found that the inmate didn't have to actually suffer a severe injury in order for the physical abuse to be seen as cruel and unusual. Today, the incidence of excessive force is less common, but still used in some institutions. Now, the issue that I'm guessing that we can all imagine is that when was the last time you saw what went on inside of a prison? Right? Yeah, me too. We don't know what goes on inside prisons because we can't see what goes on inside prisons. So, interesting. Inmates have far more fear from each other than from correctional officers, and I would probably still say that's true. Maintaining morality in prisons. Correctional officers reported they experience a great deal of stress and stress-related illness. You can imagine. I can imagine. I never actually worked in a correctional facility for a long period of time. I mean, I did some shifts. I worked several shifts. I was inside a correctional facility to go interview people and do things like that, but I did not work for months on end or years on end inside of a correctional facility. But I can imagine between high blood pressure, alcoholism, divorce, things like that. It's a stressful job. It's a very depressing job. As you can imagine, every single day you walk into a correctional facility full of hopeless people who want to kill themselves, each other, and you. It's pretty rough. Maintaining morality in a coercive environment is no easy task. And going in, having a really strong moral and ethical code is very important. Jails, a lot of people, first of all, don't know the difference between prison and jail. Prison, long-term state facility, people serving, they are sentenced felons serving more than a year, but typically we're talking they're there for quite some time. These are usually offenders who have already accepted the fact that they're going to be locked up for a while. They're typically more seasoned criminals who are ready to just do their time and move on. Now, jails are very different. These are very unpredictable. You've got people from all walks of life. You've got all kinds of different, it's just very unpredictable. Lots of mental illness, men, women. You've got a DUI offender next to a murder offender. So the jail, very different, very fast-paced, different people in and out every day, a very, very, very different type of population. Transitory and unstable. Yeah, that's a perfect way to describe it. These are people who are still high, still coming up. Excuse me. It's not COVID. I'm sorry. Still coming off drugs, still high, undiagnosed mental illness, maybe all kinds of crazy stuff goes on in jail. So kind of a pretty different environment. Treatment staff, you do have people who come into the facilities to work with your offenders, whether those are psychiatrists. These are people who do maybe anger management, family counseling, treatment and therapy, NAAA, educators, all kinds of stuff. So these staff do come in and help with the offenders. Community corrections. Now, when we're talking about community corrections, we're talking about people under correctional care, supervision, that are living in the community. So probation and parole. Do they have discretion? Yes, they do. Any type of personal relationship with an offender is inappropriate. Parole officers, a little bit different. They are typically supervising people who are just getting out of prison. So these are the serious violent felons that are coming out of prison. So they're getting out of prison early for whatever reason. Older, seasoned offenders, typically. 2/3 of their inmates typically get rearrested within 3 years. Recidivism rates are fairly high. Young black men are more likely to reoffend. Recidivism is reoffending after completing a period or a term of corrections or correctional supervision. Halfway houses, yeah, we still have these. A lot of times, halfway houses are basically considered a place for a person who is got one foot halfway in prison and 1 foot halfway out. Now, typically, these are people who don't have a family to go to right after they get out of prison. Maybe they don't have a suitable housing or a strong support system. So halfway houses are typically staffed by non-correctional people, normal people, non-sworn people. Civilians, there you go. That's what I'm trying to say. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we do have some halfway houses here too. Oh, there you go. Blah, blah, blah. All done.